Today we're going to talk about a special group of HTML elements called containers. So far you've learned about a lot of HTML elements, but every element you've learned about has its own meaning. It has a very specific semantic meaning. For example, if I put an IMG tag on the page, everybody knows that I'm putting an image on the page. Everyone knows exactly what that is. But there's so many different types of content and so many things that we need to do on web pages that we need some generic HTML elements. With HTML containers, we have generic tags that can be used for a variety of different purposes. And we, as the author of the web page, are the ones that provide the meaning to the element. So once again, there are a special set of tags that you'll learn of elements that are HTML generic containers. They do not have an official meaning. They're neutral tags. You can use them to group things together. You can use them to style your pages. You can use them to structure the pages that you write. The first one I want you to know about is called span. Span is a generic element that is used for what we call inline content. By inline content, we mean phrasing content like text that flows across the page. You would use a span to wrap around a word and style it, for example. And that's what I have here in this example. I have used a span tag and I have wrapped it around this "oops, I did it again" phrase. As you can see, you can wrap tags around other tags. What I did here was I used a generic container, this span element, to color all of the text within the tag red. So this is a perfect example of how to use a span element. Once again, span is a generic element. It doesn't have a specific meaning. It's normally used for styling, just like you see in this example right here. Anything you enclose within the opening and closing tag, you can style or do whatever you want to with. The other generic container you need to know about is called a div. So the div is often referred to as the tag of last resort. When there isn't some other tag that you can use that has meaning, you're probably going to use a div. The div is often used to group elements together and is often used to structure the web page itself. So I have an example here where I've used the div to group together an H1 heading that says Britney Spears and then an image of Britney Spears. By grouping those together, I can work on both of them at once. So I could style them at once, I could position them at once, I can do whatever I want. The important thing to remember about the div is that it isn't used to style individual phrases or words like the span is. It is used for what's called block level content, which is basically to say that the div starts on its own line and the next div has to go underneath it. So it's used for those larger block-like structures on your page rather than to contain individual phrases or words. As always, I've included a link to the Mozilla Developer Network. Make sure that you click on the link and that you look at the examples and read the documentation for both the span and div element. They're really important. When you're done with that, you are going to do the challenge, which allows you to get hands-on practice using these generic containers. Now let's take a minute to do a quick demo so that you understand how to use these tags in real life. So I'm going to imagine that I have a web page and I create myself a paragraph. I use the P element because I want a paragraph and that's what the P tag gives me. It has semantic meaning. It means paragraph. So I might put in a sentence in my paragraph. It is really important to study computer science. Now let's say I thought that the word really was really important. Well, let's say I wanted to highlight it in yellow because it's that important. Well, I don't have a tag in HTML. I don't have an element in HTML that says highlight. So I need to create my own. I want to use a generic container. And I'm going to use a span because span is used for phrasing content for things like text and individual words. So what I might do is go around the word really and add span. Make sure that it wraps the content. And then the next thing I might do is I might say, okay, well, I want to style that. So I can use an inline style element, put that in the beginning of my tag. background color yellow, and then font weight bold. And what I've done is I've created myself a nice little bold and highlighter element. And I used the span generic container to do that. So span in this case doesn't have a meaning, but I've given it meaning by the fact that I'm giving it a background color of yellow and a font weight of bold. So this is exactly how you would use the span element. It's a generic inline container. But what about the div element? What about the generic block level container? When might I use something like that? Well, let's say I had something awesome on my page, like an H1 heading that said invisible bike, and then I had one of my favorite cat memes that said invisible bike. What if I wanted to take this content and I wanted to center it on my page? Well, I don't have some special HTML tag that says group something together and center it, so I have to make that myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a div element to the page, and I'm going to wrap my invisible bike heading and the image with this div element. Then all I have to do is give that div element some meaning. I've got it grouped together now. Now I can use that to do things. So let's say I want to center it. I could use an inline style attribute, and I could say text, align, center, and there we go. This div has allowed me to not only group the elements together, but then also to do something. It allowed me to create a tag that has some meaning. Now, there are many different things you can do with span and div, but I just wanted you to have some context for how these elements may be used on the page.